Welcome everybody back to Veil of Sound. I am very happy to finally be able to interview people who are releasing on one of my favorite labels, Constellation Records. It has not happened by now, so I'm really happy that it once in a while is working. And before I ask them the usual Veil of Sound question, I have to ask how to pronounce the project's name. My first idea would be FYEAR, but I might be wrong because it's FYEAR. So Jason and Kaie, first of all, thanks for being on the show, and maybe clue us up how to pronounce your project.
Well, thanks for having us. And this is a familiar question, actually. And I've seen a few variations, but yours is new. So it's close, and all variations are accepted, I guess. It's one of those names that isn't straightforward. But people have been saying FYEAR, FYEAR. I usually emphasize the Y, FYEAR. I think Jason might have a different approach.
I pronounce it FYEAR, but I love fire. That's great. And I think it's great that the name is open for interpretation as well, and can mean different things for different people. But even within the ensemble, we all have our own takes of the pronunciation. But yeah, as Kaie says, I'm leaning towards FYEAR, and I think Kaie has a little bit more emphasis on the year.
But it's never meant as an acronym in the sense of please spell it out, like FYEAR.
No. I guess we could figure out something to make it an acronym, right? But as it stands, no, it's kind of we had mentioned this the other day, that it was coined during the pandemic. We were doing a performance, which was it the Lion d'Or performance that we were recording for? I think it was. And you remember during the pandemic, a lot of festivals had sort of went online, right? So they had artists record in a venue, and then they screened the audio as part of, they streamed the audio for their festival, or the video. So we were doing something like that, and the name came about just because it was during the pandemic, and it was a fucked up year. And it sort of was a
that is exactly what crossed my mind right now.
Yeah,
that's exactly, yeah, it was a fucked up year, and so yeah. Thus became FYEAR.
Yeah, now it makes more sense. I got to admit, I was really wondering, where does that name come from? Well, acronym, for your exquisite oral reach, something like that, right? Of course, and you can put a lot of that into it. Yes. So, and then of course, the next question, or usually the first question that we have here on the show is, if you have any kind of shirt or merch that you want to present to our beloved audience.
Like our own?
You can use your own, you can plug your bands, you can plug, in your case, the poetry that you've been quite successful with. We'll come to talk about that a little later. Or also plug any friend's band or project that you would like to plug. It's your chance to do nearly everything you want to.
Oh. Jason, you go first.
Yeah, I do not have any merch or band shirts, unfortunately, and I'm kind of traveling between the west coast of Canada and Montreal, so most of my paraphernalia still is in Montreal. But yeah, what would I right now? Honestly, I'd like to plug a couple a new signee on Constellation Records, Erica Angel, who I played in her previous band, Thus Owls. And she's a recent signee on Constellation and has a solo record coming out. Artist.
Tell her if she ever needs somebody to talk to, I'm here. I've listened to the album.
Yeah, no,
pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, you should reach out to her. Yeah, Yeah, she's an absolute force live, and it's been a privilege to be on stage with her. So I'm gonna take my opportunity to plug her and her record.
Yeah. And to give Kaie another like moment to think of, you just said you are traveling between Montreal and the British Columbia west coast of Canada, but where would you at the moment call home?
That's a complicated question for me at the moment. Well,
Facebook said it
I
is
have
complicated.
I have yeah, about 3 years ago, I purchased a home, an actual property on this island called Quadra Island off of Vancouver Island. And I've been slowly but surely building a studio out here and a cabin here for people to come and stay and work with me out here. It's been a long process, and so I'm still have roots in Montreal. My wife and my baby are in Montreal right now. Sadly, they're not here with me. So I've been bouncing back and forth, building my future home out here. But I still have a partial home in Montreal. So I think I'm 2/3 out here on the West Coast and 1/3 in Montreal.
So
I can't commit.
The future plans are British Columbia.
Yeah, they are for me. Yeah, they are for myself and my family. But I'm in a pretty remote area. It's an island off of an island, so it takes some time to build some infrastructure to be able to work here and create music here and record and develop things here. So it's in the future, yeah, this is where we'll be.
Still sounds very livable, and you know, looking at the backdrop that we see there, it seems like a fireplace. Looks cozy. Looks nice.
It's beautiful. It's really, I feel very fortunate to be building something here. So yeah, it's great.
And before Mr. Kellough gives us an answer, I totally forgot, you know, being a stupid European. Is it Kaie? Is it Kaie? What is it?
Oh, it's Kaie. Yeah.
Okay.
Kaie.
So it's like a German name, basically.
Well, it's there are a bunch of variations from around the world, and mine is from South America. So yeah, but in terms of the who I would plug, I guess I'd go with that. I'd go with Erica Angel. I was at her record launch recently. It was a fantastic event, great show, with strings. And in terms of I don't actually own any band t-shirts. A number of years ago, I had a Bad Brains t-shirt, but I don't own a band t-shirt aside from that. So I don't, yeah, but I'll plug Erica. Yeah.
By the way, that is also
my last
something
band.
that again,
Jason? Pardon me, Jason?
I was gonna divulge that I think my last band t-shirt was a Soundgarden t-shirt.
Did you purchase it back in the day, or was it vintage?
Yeah, back in the day. Like, I really do not have any band paraphernalia. I got to go way back to like my youth.
Well, being one of those guys who never grows up, I can plug something. My friends in Buñuel, don't know if you're familiar with them, but anything that Eugene does is awesome, and I just love everything that he did. No matter if it's Whipping Boy or Oxbow or Buñuel. So yeah, for anybody who is not familiar with the band, go check our archives. You might find some interviews with Mr. Robinson there. And now let's talk about the upcoming eponymous self-titled record. When this one comes out, for transparency for everybody, the record is already out for a few weeks or days. So I'm very sure that response will be good, because I think the record is really good. And there is one reason for that. And the reason is the record doesn't give a fuck about genres. That is something that I love. But honest question, was this eclectic nature of the sounds and soundscapes on the record, was that something that you from the beginning wanted to do?
You know, it's funny because I think that sometimes, this is just speculation, right? I would imagine that if you sometimes when you set out to do something specific like that, the results might not be as fluid and natural as you might want, right?
Yeah.
And but I do think that, Jason, I mean, maybe you can jump in here too. I feel like the way it moves between different passages, which reference different genres, is a result of the unique instrumentation, but also just the demands of the piece and the demands of the composition, the demands of the piece and the composition in terms of their relationship to the words and what the vocalists were doing. But I think that I guess genre agnostic direction came about not because we set out to do that, but because the piece demanded it.
Mm-hmm. I like the term genre agnostic. Really, I'll use that. I'll steal that one.
Yeah, to contribute to that, to answer, Kaie and I often work together in a duo format, and largely, obviously he's responsible for development of the language and the verbiage, and I'm developing the musical language. And as this piece developed, I think just as I was composing the music that supported the narrative of the language that was developed, the music just lent itself to certain nods to certain type of genres to most effectively support that narrative arc over the whole piece. It's definitely not something that was conceived of in that we should touch on, metal music, or we should touch on ambient music, or we should be touching on 12/8 Afro-Cuban music, or we should be doing this. It's just really what is the correct backdrop and supportive elements to propel this narrative from beginning to end and tell a compelling story. And as Kaie says, it's just, that's what the piece demands of it, and that's the way that it evolved.
To maybe clarify my idea a little bit, I just, like you also said, guys, the record doesn't follow one genre. It definitely has tidbits from here, from there, from everywhere. And it also flows, and I think that is a very important word for this record. It flows very well from one genre to the next. It can flow from short breakbeat elements into wonderful, wide open cinematic post-rock passages. That is definitely something that is striking about the record, which also, in my opinion, makes it a standout record. I can see when you say, like, okay, we didn't want to do genre songs, but one thing that strikes me, and I don't know if that is also just what the songs, or in this case, the parts wanted, but more or less every part flows into the next one. Very often when I listened to it, at some point I lost track of which track I'm on, which is always a very, very good thing, I think. So the question must be this flow effect between the parts, between the songs. Was that something that you wanted to keep it going, like one fluid, nearly breathing organism?
Yeah, I'll speak on that. That's very perceptive. This piece was actually written as one singular piece, and so it wasn't.
Well, I understood something.
You absolutely, yeah, that's very perceptive. Yeah, it was written as a single track. It was a single piece, and through the process of documentation and the needs for creating access points for listeners, and being able to digest the material, we retroactively created more defined parts. But it was definitely written as something that could be taken in as essentially one single flowing piece, and through that, as you said, that's why each of these parts, while they all have their distinctive character, their purpose is really to propel us into the next part and into the next part and into the next part. And so there's rarely a very like a clear beginning and end of each part, but rather a forward momentum that is supposed to maintain the listener for the full duration of the piece and the live performance.
In that sense, it reminded me a lot of Queens of the Stone Age's Songs for the Deaf, where also everything flows as if it's a radio show. At the same time, I was wondering whether you might make the whole thing accessible as one track, because I think, as I said, for me, one of the most interesting things is, having such a long thing and not being able to skip. I'm not talking about bringing out the vinyl like my friends in Bellwitch who always do 85-minute tracks. No, not. But I was wondering whether, at some point or other, you might think about releasing the whole thing as a digital download thing on Bandcamp, because I think it's that good. I think it works that well.
That's lovely to hear. Oh yeah, I was really actually advocating at one point to release it as a single track. The vinyl that's coming out is broken into simply just two parts, which represent the side A, side B, of course. And of course, in the digital medium, each of those tracks. Oh, there you go, Kai. And each of those tracks.
You see, you have band merch to show.
That's true.
Yes, we do. I'll show it off here. How's Jason?
Yeah, while Jason is talking, show us the vinyl.
So yeah, there was a great deal of discussion of initially the digital release was actually going to be released as one single track. And there was a great deal of discussion around that. And ultimately, having decided to break it up into the 7 parts that it is, I think it actually does create an opportunity for people to engage in the material in an entirely different way, to be able to jump around and be able to kind of to digest it, because it's definitely a demanding listen for somebody to be able to commit themselves to the duration of the piece and listen to this beginning and end. And of course, there's no breaks in between those digital tracks. So you always have that opportunity to listen to it parts 1 through 7 without interruption. But I really do. I feel great in hearing that that's your response and your desired way of kind of taking this material in, because that's kind of how it was conceived and how it was written, and it's very perceptive of you to.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. That's kind of vindicating in a way, because it's you wonder whether people are going to, even though it's noted in places that it's one piece, it's one full piece. You wonder whether, since we broke it into distinct parts for online distribution, you wonder whether people are going to listen to it and think, oh, this is one piece, right? And wonder whether people are going to engage with, because I think breaking it into parts, at least in my own listening, like what it's meant is that I've gone back to listen to specific parts, right? Like I like this part, I want to listen to part 5 now, or I want to listen to part 3. And so for other listeners, I was wondering about that, whether they would, be inclined to engage with the whole thing as one. And I was hoping that would be the case. So it would be nice if that were possible, just to kind of put it out there online as one piece so it can just roll.
So for everybody who is watching this and might not have heard the record yet, first of all, do so. I usually don't say it that early in the year, but I know that this record will be top 10 in my list this year, because it's an overwhelmingly good listen. So if you haven't listened to it yet, listen to it as a whole, with good speed, with good headphones. You will be rewarded. Last thing, when we talk about like cutting it into pieces, and that. First of all, I hope that you will come to Europe with the thing at some point or another. And then, if you were to perform a record, you would probably perform it as a complete set, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, when we've performed it in the past, that's how we performed it. We were at the Murs Festival in Germany last May. And we had actually stretched, it's on the record, it's 44 minutes and change. And we'd stretched it out to about 54 minutes. It's, it's one comprehensive moving piece. Although there were a couple of moments where people started applauding, thinking that it was like, that's probably the end, but then it continued. Those moments are always kind of interesting. Where there's like a build, it builds up, it builds up, it builds up, and there's a bit of a release. And then suddenly people applaud. But then the music is still moving and developing. Yeah, but that's how it's played. And to reference what Jason was saying about the forward momentum too, the fun thing about that, about playing it live, is that you never, when you're playing it, you always have to be very attentive to what's coming and what's ahead. You have to know the piece and be aware of the next development, because as you noticed, it has, of course, all those different sections that shift genre, but we don't stay in those sections for a very long time. It consistently shifts, it consistently moves. So
when you say that you stretch it out into 54 minutes, adding nearly another 25% to the record, which I figure is probably improvisation. You're on stage with 6 other people. How well do they have to know the whole thing?
Well, there's a score that everyone is following, and every single section of that score is open in terms of length of time. And I'm basically conducting the ensemble, dictating the piece, dictating the pace of the piece. So within every section, there's always cues to advance us to the next section. And I'm kind of feeling out, the energy and the arc of which we are on the trajectory of, in order to make that decision of when to move forward. And that's why sometimes, based on what's happening in the ensemble, it feels like certain sections need to pull out a little bit more, and then maybe other times that we need to move forward at this time in order to avoid, plateaus or stagnant moments. And so that's why the piece is living. It always can expand or can contract. But even then, the score is largely, there's graphic elements to it. There's strict, notation as well. But in order for people to be aware of these cues that keep us moving forward, they definitely need to know the piece inside and out, beyond the score that situates in front of them, as just, it ends up being more of a reference for them. But we really need to know the piece intimately so that we can kind of move together as one unit. Because as you said, it's a lot of members on stage, and to move cohesively in this forward manner requires everybody to know, like Kaie said, exactly where we're going next.
We have to talk about the overarching theme behind the record. And I'm not sure whether I got all of it, but if anybody asks me what the record is about, I'd say it's about ownership. Ownership of oneself, ownership of one's future, and also one's present. But also simply, in a way, ownership of property. Am I completely on the wrong path, Kaie, or is there something that I got right?
No, you're that's a bullseye. Because I think I was going to say, who does the future belong to? Is a major theme. But to kind of complement what you're saying and maybe try to extend it, the way I think about the themes in the text, is about how we think of our relationship to the future, right? And I guess, we're always in a moment where that relationship is changing, right? But I think particularly now, where, and especially at the time, you know, during the pandemic, when some of this writing was ongoing, you know, we were really thinking about our relationship to the future, thinking about climate change, thinking about, you know, all kinds of global inequalities. You remember all the discussions of the supply chain, and how it meant that it got so difficult to get groceries for a reasonable price any longer. You know, things like that, and how those affect our ownership of our own lives, and our own experience, and of course our future. So yeah, you're pretty dead on. One of the interesting things, though, that I find is that when it comes to working with Jason, Jason will often ask me for really specific things related to text, right? Like the text will have to have kind of some kind of musical division or musical function. And what that often means is that we may come up with something on the spot, and it will instantly get codified into a musical form. And then at that point, it's there, right? It's laid down and it's not going to change. There are other pieces in the text that are a little bit more flexible and that can change over time, and that I have a little bit more access to, because if I change them, it won't disrupt much musically. But there are other passages where if I move a syllable, right? If I substitute a word, it will disrupt things musically. So the interesting thing is that some of that text was written pretty spontaneously. There's certain repetitive passages, the Mercury looms in the weather, water freeze. Some of those repetitive passages were written kind of on the spot. And then there are other passages that were written over time and gradually changed and shifted. So yeah.
That is very interesting when you talk about that. And when we then also think about, you know, elongating the music, which if we go the full way, then as soon as you're elongating the pieces or parts of the record, then you are creating a new version, a new future of that music, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's I think I'm going to come back to my description of the piece itself as being a living thing, and that you know that living thing has different experiences on a day to day, and you know, while we can be working with the same material, and when we come to a live performance, we animate that material. That material can have its own spontaneous life, and that's going to look different each and every iteration. Even though it speaks to the same, you know, same thematic material, it can perhaps have a different outcome with every different entry point.
Spontaneous life. That's good.
It's another one.
Yeah, which one of the best versions of life, isn't it? What strikes me also is that, and now it somehow culminates in where you two are living. Sometimes the music is as hectic as New York City or Montreal. And then a few seconds later it's as calm as upstate New York or an island off of British Columbia's coast. Do you think that also is like a reflection of not only the pandemic time, but, you know, where we are at the moment in general, you know, 2024, a very paradox life that we all lead as mankind?
Kai, do you want to go first on this?
What I can say about the line, this is a good question. This is
it's a great question.
This is totally a literary question. Yeah. But this, you know, one thing I can say about the written piece, as your question references different places, right? And different kinds of sensory experience based on place that might have informed the piece. In terms of the language is not like I didn't make up the language, right? It's not my language. It was the language of the moment, and it was drawn from multiple sources that were expressed, that expressed something about that moment that we were living through in and around 2020. So from, YouTube videos of philosophers in the UK talking about climate change in the future to news broadcasts to excerpts of people's posts on Twitter. And some of those were culled in moments where the cultural climate was a little bit more frantic, and others in moments where it was a little bit more relaxed and reflective. So, that I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it sort of parallels it. Yeah.
Yeah, and on the musical side of things, I mean, I think that it's really interesting that you just brought up the fact that that we're living in different places of the world at the moment that are very different in its environment. Right now I'm looking out my window and there's a deep fog over the ocean, and I literally early this morning I saw a humpback whale come by, and whereas
you don't see that very often in Montreal.
You do not.
Oh.
You do not. And I think that in terms of being a composer and thinking about creating a musical document, I often think about balance. I do, and I think about holding periods of tension that would then rely on a certain amount of release to counter that tension, and sometimes maybe even pushing those extremities, but ultimately finding something that is creating a balanced experience from beginning to end, and utilizing that kind of way of thought to help define the duration of sections and perhaps the intensity of sections, whether it be a fevered pitch or whether it retreat into a great calmness, and how long do you stay in that based off of the feeling as a performer and a listener inside of the ensemble. I think that's always essentially that sense of balance is like what's kind of dictating me to cue the ensemble forward from section to section. And until you mentioned it, I think that actually living between the city life of Montreal and living where I am right now, that it kind of parallels to my personal life at the moment too. So I didn't actually make that connection until you mentioned it. So, but I think it's interesting how it permeates our art and has come forward in this piece in particular.
Yeah, I mean, like, there is no art, even though, of course, a lot of people say so, but I still believe that there is no art that is completely independent from its surroundings. And even if people say, oh, we don't want to do X, Y, Z, as soon as you determine that you're not going to do X, Y, Z, you are acknowledging that there is X, Y, Z, and therefore you are depending on it again. There is also something that we should mention. There is something in the music, and especially in the narrative and the lyrics, that reminds me a lot of the great, for lack of a better word, African-American or African-rooted vocalists of the last 30, 40, 50 years, like Jill Scott Heron. I also thought about Saul Williams, KRS-One. And so that is probably a question for Kaie. I mean, like, you are a poet, but you're also part of, I guess we're all like the same generation, right? Somewhere in the 70s, born in the 70s, right? So is like regular poets, Seamus Heaney, Toni Morrison, however you want to call them, whoever you want to mention, are these real influences on you, or are you already one of those persons who says like, nah, one of my major influences is hip-hop? Where do you position yourself?
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny. My brother was a few years younger than me. He listened to a lot of hip hop. Um, and I didn't listen to as much, although one of the first his first couple cassettes I bought when I was a kid growing up in Western Canada, I mean, Run DMC Raising Hell and Beastie Boys tape, right? But you know, I would say that in terms of my writing and art, I write for publication, print, and so I do read Seamus Heaney and his contemporary Derek Walcott and some of those writers. I love Toni Morrison, um, and I am a print poet, page poet, but I have also always loved the several traditions of oral poetry. So I always loved some of the declamatory style of some of the beat poets from the 50s in the States. I loved some of the African American poets like Gil Scott Heron, some of the last poets. I've seen Ursula Rucker a few times, Sonia Sanchez, some of the Jamaican dub poets, Jean Binta Breeze, Stacey Ann Chin, and a whole host of others. And then, there's some poets in there who really, and Saul Williams, of course, love to Saul Williams. But then there are also a whole host of other poets. There's Anthony Joseph in the UK who I think he's worked with Michelle and Cello's band. And they've produced some really, really fantastic records. And I just love the experimentation I love what happens when the words are sort of complex and difficult to grasp and maybe frustrating at times, but at least difficult, right? Where there's I guess, a musical function that they perform, but also a conceptual function as well, right? That is challenging and that speaks to our world in maybe an unexpected way, maybe uses language that you don't hear all the time, in common conversation. And I just love that combination. And so hip hop, I'm aware of a lot of hip hop and I like a lot of hip hop, but I've never been like a huge hip hop head, although I do fall right smack in the middle of that generation, right? Like between 75 and 1990, I was 0 to 15, right? So that was that. So that is my generation, but I guess I'm a little out of step with my time, maybe.
Yeah, there's just one thing, when you say born 75, you're only 3 years older than me, but you look 10 years younger. So that's a shame.
That's hilarious. It's got to be the music.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that you would say something like that because I think that there is something about the narrative which is not strictly hip hop, but yeah, very, very poetical. That's why when a friend of mine asked me what I was listening to, I was referring to Damon Locks. And I thought that might be a good comparison. Empowering, but not necessarily hip hop. And that is also something. And then we, of course, have to talk about the music, because when we talk about Damon Locks and his Black Monument Ensemble, there is a lot of Afro jazz in there. And now, Jason, that might be something for you. Being a saxophone player and, of course, when we talk about the saxophone, the first thing that comes to mind is probably for like 90% of the people is jazz. Is that something that you decidedly listen to, or where you say like, I've listened to the classics and I don't need another Coltrane, another Gillespie, another Armstrong?
Yeah, as a saxophonist growing up and learning the instrument, you end up studying within that idiom for sure. I actually started off studying classical saxophone, of all things, which really is rooted in like contemporary music, new music that's written for the instrument. And then once I left high school, then I actually did study in a jazz program. I did a jazz performance program, and therefore, you know, learned that vocabulary and studied those players. And I think even at that early age, I definitely felt like this was advancing my ear training, my technical ability to translate things that I heard on my instrument, the general idea of like improvisation, playing over harmony and playing inside of structures. Those are all things that definitely illuminated me, but I had a feeling that tradition, as a jazz tradition, it was not really my authentic voice. And so, you know, once I left school and you're out being a professional musician and you start to get into the world of composition and writing music that means something to you, you know, I definitely felt like, as you kind of said, there's, you know, there's so many incredible tenor saxophonists that are really cut deep from the tradition of Coltrane, and there's so many great alto players that are cut from the deep tradition of bebop, and I don't know if my voice needed to be added to that, you know, to that community. And then when you get into music, that, you know, you're given an opportunity to write and document things that are meaningful to you, then that just kind of steers you towards creating something that is representative of your true self. And I you know, I've always been interested simultaneously in contemporary music, in electronic music, in free improv, but also I love jazz music as well, and I love Afro-Cuban music, and I mean, and ambient and metal stuff, and like, you know, so it all kind of comes through. You know, I don't think it was you know, I don't think it was like a particular choice to steer clear of anything. Like, you know, we're kind of circling back to the conversation around genres, but I think, you know, as a saxophonist, you learn that music, and then as you get into the world of documenting your music and your voice, then ultimately what comes out comes out.
I totally get that. You know, it sounds as if you get the ear, the skills, and then you're being pushed out to do with that whatever you want. Good. That's probably the best way of using that knowledge. I want to come back. I have like a few more questions before we come to the final part of this interview. And that might again be something a little bit more for Kaie. When listening to the record, listening to the lyrics, I sometimes had the question whether you're also talking about the difference between the construction, the image of our future, and what really is our future. If you look at it, what is more appealing to you at the moment? What really is the future, or what we in our heads construct it to be?
I mean, I think you answered it. It's how we would construct it, but also what goes into that construction, right? The different anxieties, the different desires, the different pressures, the different social situations that are shaped by where we live and what our background is and who we are, right? And the text in the piece tries to pull fragments from a variety of different places like that, right? You know, and to, I guess, try to piece together a cohesive but still fragmented and broken attempt to envision the future and think about the future and think about our relationship to
it. And all of the narrative is related through two vocalists, through you yourself and Tawhida Tanya Evanson.
Yes.
I mean, like, you write it all, but when you write the lyrics, do you already have her part or her performance in mind? Or do you, first of all, strictly write it and then you two see where it's going from the basis?
This is a good question. Thanks for asking this, because when you're writing for two voices, you're putting words in someone else's mouth, right?
Yeah.
And
maybe they don't
there's a
like
certain
them.
sense. Well, this exactly. So there's a certain sensitivity that you need to have in terms of what you're saying. Would you want another person to say this? How do you think they would feel saying it? Do you think that they would accept to say it? I mean, Tanya is an old and dear friend and collaborator. So there's a lot of creative trust there. So I imagine if I presented her with text, she would try to say it, regardless of she would trust the text, right?
Yeah.
But I think part of my job is to be trustworthy in that position and to really think about whether what I'm giving her to say, she can say and be true to herself, and to her own convictions and to her own aesthetic sensibilities, saying it. And I have to say, it's really a treat to work with her and to work with two voices and to have a kind of duo vocal experience, because at least for me, in my experience, what winds up happening is that the two voices, of course, they're distinct, but there's a lot of interplay between them. And they sort of just become the voice or the vocal section. I feel like in moments they work together in such a way that, in the same way that the two drummers might work together, and that it becomes sort of the rhythm section, I guess. The way the two vocalists sometimes work together, it just becomes the vocal delivery. And the distinctions between the two voices in moments sort of vanish, and then they come back in other moments. So at least that's how I hear it and experience it, especially in performance.
Yeah, I also like to mention that the ensemble was conceived of and written in balance of a left and a right. So as we set up on stage, there's a left drummer and a right drummer, and then there's myself and a counterpoint, Joe Grasso on pedal steel, and then there's a left and a right violinist, and then there's a left and a right vocalist. And as Kaie mentioned earlier, when I'm writing to incorporate the text, often I'm asking Kaie to write very specific syllabic things or phonetic things that can function really as the instrumentation as the rest of the ensemble. And Tanya is uniquely qualified to be the counterpart to Kaie. And I find it really fascinating that, for one, like, if you don't have that balance between the two vocalists, then there would be one vocalist kind of overpowering the other, or other way, instead of feeling that sense of balance that the whole ensemble is contributing to. And secondly, when a narrative is being broken apart between these two voices and delivered essentially as one, it creates this unique hybrid voice that, especially coming from a male and female voice, can be an all-encompassing message, which is really something that I never actually forecasted. But when in hearing some of the back and forth qualities of specifically this parts where they're really written as a musical building block inside the ensemble, I do find that they really become a singular voice in that has a unique quality to it. And yeah, the panning that you hear in headphones when listening to this recording was also conceived of in the composition in the live performance as well. So this ping-ponging left right and this arcing from the left to the right to the left is part of the composition itself. And I think it's really like it's just really brought together in a wonderfully unique way with Tanya's contributions and integration as essentially a part of Kaie's voice and vice versa.
That strikes me when you say that you've already laid it out performance-wise as two sides, because usually, and that is something that we all must admit, usually when we see 4 people on one and 4 people on the other side, the first thing that comes into our mind is usually a battle, right? Like 2 crews battling each other. But then the way you describe it, it's not a battle, it's more building bridges so that there is not 2 sides, but one middle that you are basically creating, right?
Yeah, and the way that is created, it changes throughout the duration of the piece. Sometimes there's a strong bridge between those 2 drummers, right, and the pedal steel, myself, and electronics, so the violins, and there's all these different permutations that there can be supportive ensembles inside of that instrumentation, and different bridges that can be made, and you know, we can play, we do play, and it's written into the score that, you know, at times this voice on the right is connected to this drummer on the left, and vice versa. So we have a crisscross, and other times the left and the right are working in harmony, and other times it is creating conflict and going back and forth and elevating, and then finding a resolution where, you know, we have different bridges that are made. And that's the really engaging part of the live performance of this. And, you know, it comes across in the headphones, in the documentation, in the mixing that, you know, that we did. It all reflects what those stage relationships are. But I find this, yeah, a really fertile ground for exploration and writing within this ensemble, and it's really been a fun thing to discover.
You know, it's I have to say, it's also nice performing with the second voice, because you're always hearing yourself in relation to someone else, and you're always responding to that person and to their articulation, to their inflection, to their you know, their style and demeanor when they're delivering things, to the way they approach different passages, their response to the changing intensities of the band. And you know, it's a unique kind of performance experience, because it's a shared experience. So you feel what you're doing, but you also kind of really closely experience what your co-vocalist is doing.
Yeah, it's a clearer feedback than the feedback that you get from the audience, because, I mean, of course, as much as the audience is always part of a performance, but here, you know, having a second side to the middle, of course, you get a much closer and effectful feedback. Yeah, can see that. So once again, I say, like, please come back to Europe. Show us how you do that. I think there are a few festivals over here that might also be very much interested in that. I'll try to talk to some of my friends, because I think it really deserves to be staged more.
We'd love to play.
Yeah, I hope so. So guys, first of all, thanks for all the insight into the record, into the creation of it, the reflection of its time, but also the big topics that the record is talking about. But nobody leaves the Veil of Sound interview without having to go through the infamous quickfire round, where you get 2 alternatives and have to choose. Like, what is more interesting to you, Toronto or Ottawa? New York City or LA? Deep dish pizza, which is not a pizza, but real pizza. You know, like AC versus DC. So we'll start off with something simple. Jill Scott Heron versus Saul Williams.
Not simple.
I never said those would be nice.
I mean, you know, I can tell you a story in response to that.
Please. We love stories.
When I arrived in Montreal in 1998, I arrived 2 weeks after Gil Scott had performed here. So I didn't know that he was performing here, but I just narrowly missed that performance. And years later, I did see Saul Williams perform here with the band. and opening for Michael Franti and Spearhead. So,
by the way,
yeah.
that was something
And so-
something else that came to my mind, Kai, when I listened to your performance. One of the things was Franti. Disposable
Okay.
Hip Hops was my
my
response.
Yeah, Disposable Heroes. Yeah, of course. But yeah, that was so I mean, I've always appreciated Gil Scott, of course, but also Saul Williams, because you know Saul is in the tradition and sounds amazing. Just voice alone, Saul can just command a room. It's just wonderful to hear him. So yeah, both of them.
Yeah. No, not both. Don't weasel around. You have to make a decision. Did you see that, Jason? He told the story in order to get away with it.
He's very political that way.
Yeah.
So make a choice. And if you cannot for the work of it, then always, that is something that I always say, choose to what would you rather listen to right now, Jill Scott or Saul Williams?
Oh, you know what? I mean, I got to go with the classics.
Okay.
So I'll go with Gil Scott. Yeah.
Okay. Jason?
I'll go with Saul Williams just to balance that. I mean, it would be exactly, you know, my one little addition to that question is that I think this piece as FYEAR, its first true like staged presentation of this material was actually opening for Saul Williams in Montreal for the Suoni Piero Popolo Festival. So I'm going to take a nod to Saul for providing us with the opportunity to be on stage and bring these players together and write this.
Yeah, Saul was super cool. He chatted with us at the end of the show, and he put on a fantastic show as well.
So maybe the following question is more difficult for Jason. You have to choose one of the two Johns, Coltrane versus Zorn.
Okay, well, I mean, I have to go with Coltrane. I mean, it's John Zorn's contribution to contemporary music and the advancement of saxophone and mixed genres are like, it's, you know, you can't say enough. I mean, and the creation of the Zedek label and like the documentation of a community at large in just extraordinary. And but I think you know, Coltrane opened the doors of music in ways that forever changed musical history and brought together ideas of free improv and a spiritual connection to performing music, and just an ever inspiring dedication to the craft. And so I'm going to have to go with the train on this, but I hope you heard all the acknowledgement that I just sped out for Zorn. So
I don't know if both of you listened to the following two artists, but there was something in some of the songs where I was reminded a lot of Aphex Twin. And so to give you a balanced opposite, Aphex Twin versus Orchestra.
Oh, I only know a bit of Aphex Twin.
So that's your answer.
I'm not full to answer. I'm saying I don't have the qualifications.
Yeah. Jason?
oh, that's also a challenging one. I think I'm gonna go with Aphex Twin on that one. Mm-hmm. There's something about that music that also translates really amazingly well to acoustic representation of electronic music in Aphex Twin's music. And there's a record, I think it's by Alarm Will Sound, that they did like an orchestral arrangements of Aphex Twin, and I have that record. I listened to it a lot, and that just jogged my memory of translating electronic music to the acoustic realm, and how that you know, those lines can often be blurred in really mesmerizing ways. Aphex Twin.
When we talk about genre pushing metal, and also metal that is in some way related and connected to Zorn, of course, easily we come to Mike Patton, and I'll give you two of his projects, Fantomas and Mr. Bungle.
I'm just gonna say Mr. Bungle. I grew up I listened to a lot of Mr. Bungle at one point, and it's part of my musical upbringing. So
Kaie?
Mr. Bungle.
Again, Jason has introduced me to a bit of Mr. Bungle, so we'll go with Mr. Bungle.
As you said that the one band shirt that you had was Bad Brains, Kaie, I'll give you the Bad Brains versus, for me, one of the seminal 80s and 90s punk bands, Fugazi.
Oh. I also had an SNFU t-shirt at a certain point.
Yeah, but they're not so
Canadian
important.
Punk band.
I know, but sorry
No,
to
no.
SNFU. I've seen them live a couple of times, but nobody touches. Nah.
Well, I mean, you know, when Jason and I grew up in the same province in Western Canada, and let me say that locally, they provided a certain kind of cultural alternative that was much needed.
Yeah,
so
I can totally see that.
I have to give them love for that. Yeah, but yeah, I would go with Bad Brains, I guess. They were a bit of they're a solid soundtrack to a few periods in my life. But not like, you know, listening to them all the time, but always going back to them. And returning to different. And the interesting thing about them is also, you know, they did so many recordings of some of the same tracks. And when the quality of the recording and the quality of the playing changes, the song itself sounds completely different. It has a different life to it. And so I absolutely love the way that they kind of flirt with, they turn a song into noise suddenly, right? Like it's a song, and it might be, you know, 90 seconds long, and it's structured like a song, and it starts to move like a song, but suddenly it just sort of explodes into noise, and then it comes back into song structure. So there's that noise element that I really, really enjoyed with them. Yeah.
Jason, any opinions on that one? Bad Brains or Fugazi?
I feel like I should be listening to more of both, to tell you the truth. So I might go with Bad Brains because I'm more familiar with Bad Brains than I am Fugazi.
To balance it out this time, I would always go with Fugazi. I think there might be a handful of bands that I would choose over Fugazi anytime, but otherwise.
Well, this is inspiring to me. I'm going to dig into it a little bit deeper. Yeah.
Do you want to start with something? Then I guess for you, the best starting point would be the instrument. I think that might be most to your liking.
Okay. Thank you.
We talked about you being on Constellation, and I'll give you two Constellation bands, of course. So you get some friends and you get some foes.
This is going to get personal. Oh my gosh.
No. Let's for everybody who's listening to this. This is a choice on which band would you rather listen to right now. Of course, one is Godspeed You, Black Emperor, but the other is a Silver Mount Zion.
This is going to get personal.
Right now.
Okay.
So it doesn't get
personal. I share a practice space with Godspeed, and so I hear them working on their tunes, and I hear them developing their material, and I know them all quite well. That Constellation is basically it's a large family, and so we've crossed paths in so many different fronts. Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm gonna go with Godspeed. A lot of similar players, so I don't feel like I'm pitting one person over another. It's
Yeah.
you know, it's definitely there's a lot of crossover between those two ensembles. Um, I got the opportunity to open for Godspeed once, and you know, it's just really it was an amazing experience to see what they can do in commanding a room and you know create these incredible arcs on stage and for the audience experience and yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna go with Godspeed on that.
I'll go with
You go.
as much as I love as much as I love Silver Mount or Godspeed, I think I'll go with Silver Mount Zion. Jason knows this. There's one of their records that I really, really like, the Collapse Traditionalis. And I listened to that over and over again. It sort of just wound up being on repeat and wound up being the soundtrack to a novel I wrote a number of years ago. Just because I was trying to write about Montreal at a specific time. And there's a quality in that album that sort of evoked something of the mood of the city in a, you know, around 2012, 2013. And it, I think that record really sort of permeated the writing. And so, you know, it's rare that I've had that kind of sort of intimate relationship. My writing has had an intimate relationship with a particular record, right? There may be 2 or 3 different records that I've had that with, and that was one of them.
Very good answer. Would you both agree that the way that Constellation is run, just like Jason said, a big family, would you agree that that is one of their strongholds?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any experience recording or working with another label other than Constellation. And then the more output that I work on and collaborate with other people, the more I realize how special that label is, how special the community is that they've built, how intertwined the community is, and that itself is just essentially you know a unique thing that has developed over time. I think they've done an amazing job of encapsulating a certain type of art scene in Montreal, and it's really yeah, like my most of my recording output is at the Hotel de Tango, which is the recording studio that sits below the offices of Constellation, and you know, and the various different offshoot different ensembles and different projects. Inevitably there's always people who are performing in other people's ensembles, and it's just kind of grown outwardly from this very kind of organic place, and they've done a great job of being able to like uphold that over years.
Last one, and I think this is one where Kaie might sweat a little bit at least. And before I give you the 2 alternatives, I first of all want to mention something that I wanted to put at the end. We are talking with a Griffin Prize winner. So something for all the people who are not Canadian. Ta-da-da-da-da, Mr. Kellough is the winner of the most prestigious Canadian Poetry Award. So I was thinking, you know, not talking too much about it because I'm pretty sure he's too humble to acknowledge his accolades. I will give you 2 people who are famous for their poetry who both won a Nobel Prize. And we already mentioned one of them, one of my favorite poets, also because I spent some time in Ireland, Seamus Heaney. And the other one, the guy from up north, Bob Dylan.
Oh, Haney. There's no question about it.
Yeah. That was fast.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
let's just throw a complete tradition of American music under the bus and let the tank roll over it.
No, I mean, I think, you know, I feel that Bob Dylan writes great lyrics, right? And I like, for instance, I love the record Desire. There's some amazing songs and amazing lyrics on that record. You know, even when and the lyrics sort of operate in different modes. Like there's the biographical, right?
Yeah.
Joey, for instance. And then he's got like a social realist mode. He's got like a protest mode, a polemic mode. And there's a lot of versatility there, but I do think that there's a distinction to be made. I mean, there are different kinds of poetry.
Yeah.
But I think there's a distinction to be made between great song lyrics and great literary poetry. Yeah.
Can I then ask whether you agree with the Nobel Prize Committee of handing the prize to Dylan? Or do you say, like, it's a poetry award and not a lyrics award?
Well, I mean, the difference is for me that you know, if you printed out Dylan's lyrics, they might be interesting to read, right? But not nearly as interesting as they would be if you heard him articulate them, right?
Yeah.
And you can bring all of the effects that vocalizing allows you to take advantage of to the delivery of the lyrics. Whereas with Haney's poems, they're written for a different kind of experience. They're written to be read. And one of the distinctions is that when you're hearing someone sing something, it's happening on their time, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you read something, it's a different kind of time that you're experiencing when you're reading it. It's slower. It's more your time that you can impose on it. So it's a different relationship to the object and to the language and to its presentation. And that's one of the things that I love about poetry and print poetry and reading poetry, is that it allows you that time. So in terms of Dylan's being awarded, I mean, I don't know what the politics of that award were, but I remember some debates raging on Twitter about it at the time. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there were other alternatives, perhaps, but I'm a Dylan fan for sure.
Jason, your opinion on that, or do you say, like, let's go with Mr. Kellough's answer?
I'm going to defer to the Griffin Prize winner.
No, that's a clever answer. So, guys, thanks for your time. Thanks for the record. Everybody, when you see this and haven't listened to FYEAR, or FYEAR, or however you want to pronounce it, go online, check it out. As I said, listen to it as one full thing. It doesn't take you that long. Come on, let's spend an hour with good music, right? Yeah, for you, gentlemen, thanks for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for your interest and your great questions.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and thanks for taking the time to shape such good questions.
Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.